Michael?
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Today is a big Supreme Court day. It's the last day of the U.S. Supreme Court's current session, and one of the decisions expected to come down, or maybe it already has come down, is one involving a case out of Missouri.
Yep, that's exactly right. I think they'll start announcing their decisions at 10 o'clock Eastern time, so 9 o'clock Central. So, yeah, the case is Trinity Lutheran v. Comer, which was a religious preschool in Columbia that applied to the state's scrap tire recycling program. They were denied because of their religious affiliation, and so the Supreme Court is reviewing whether or not the state's decision to deny them that funding was constitutional.
Now, the idea being the separation of church and states, that a church cannot participate in a state program because it is a church, I guess, is the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, well, it's sort of complicated because, remember, the separation of church and state isn't actually enshrined in the Constitution. So the Constitution has the Establishment Clause on one side, which says that the state won't establish a religion. And then it has a Free Exercise Clause kind of in the other part of the First Amendment that says people should be free to express their religious preferences and be religious people. So what the court has to decide is sort of where those guardrails exist. At what point is the state supporting things like a scrap tire recycling program that allows religious groups to participate? At what point does that cross the bounds of establishing a religion? But also on the flip side, at what point does restricting religious organizations from participating start to impede upon people's free exercise rights?
So what are the possible scenarios coming out of today's ruling?
Yeah, so I think there's really sort of three possible scenarios. So one would be a victory for the state, which would essentially say that the decision that they made was fine, and the state's so-called Blaine Amendment, which is the part of the state constitution that bars public support of religious organizations, that's all sort of kosher with the U.S. Constitution. That's one possibility. The other flip side of it is that they could rule that particular constitutional provision completely unconstitutional, and that would have to be sort of struck from Missouri's Constitution. I think the most likely case is probably a narrow ruling on the side of Trinity Lutheran. I listened to the oral arguments and read the transcripts of it. It seemed to be a pretty broad majority of the justices, so not just the kind of 5-4 splits that we're used to seeing. A lot of them sort of said, well, listen, if providing scrap tires for the playground of a religious preschool is sort of unduly entangling the government with religion, it would seem to be that a whole bunch of other programs could fall under this purview. So they use examples of anything like a state program that wants to get rid of lead paint in buildings. Well, if one of the buildings happens to be a church and the state works to get rid of the lead paint, are they supporting that? Are they entangled with that religious group? So I would bet that that's probably the most likely outcome, to see some sort of narrow ruling that says this particular instance was not unconstitutional, but they'll punt on some of the broader constitutional questions.
Will this have any impact on programs that maybe to date, like this, haven't been available to religious institutions?
Oh, no, I think it absolutely will. I mean, on both sides of the issue. I mean, right now, if you really think about it, our government, the state government, works a lot with religious organizations. You can take Medicaid dollars to Cardinal Glennon Hospital. You can take a Bright Flight scholarship to SLU. So in some ways, if saying scrap tires are too much, that could raise questions about these programs. And also on the flip side, if the court says, listen, we can provide support for these types of quote-unquote neutral activities like having safer playgrounds or abating lead paint or things like that, that could actually broaden the types of ways in which the state can work with religious organizations to try and meet the needs of our citizens.
I've always believed that the state, kind of a collaborative effort in areas such as homelessness, in healthcare, in childcare, in areas that religious institutions, through their volunteer networks, through the things that, the programs that they've developed and they do very well, is the way to address a lot of our country's problems. And yet, we get this pushback of saying, nah, we don't want to give money to the church, we don't want to give money to the religious institution because of this separation of church and state.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the easiest way for this to sort of work out is to say, look, the government, it's not their job to either privilege or punish religious people or religious organizations. So, for example, in this particular program, they developed a set of criteria for who they would give these grants to. Now, it didn't ask any questions about being religious, or at least you don't get bonus points because you're religious. You don't get punished because you're religious. But if you're able to be the most qualified people to perform a particular social service, I think I'm with you on this one. I'm fine with the government just being agnostic towards it, to sort of say, listen, we're not going to support, or we're not going to sort of give you bonus points. We're not going to take away points from you. We're just going to stay neutral towards you. Because you're right. I mean, in America, in Missouri, in St. Louis, I mean, there's a proud tradition of religious organizations educating kids, feeding the homeless, providing higher education, providing health care. And the minute we sort of say, nope, you guys, you need to butt out, I mean, I think we could have really serious negative consequences.
Absolutely. Michael McShane talking with us about the Supreme Court decision likely to come out today, will come out today, Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll see what that decision is, and maybe we can talk about it next week at this time.
Sounds great. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Michael McShane, Director of Education Policy for the Show Me Institute. It is 8:44.